Back the hell off. That's the message that investigative reporter Michael Shellenberger posted on X in a direct response to Thierry Breton, an EU official, after he demanded that Meta, Facebook's parent company, and X, formerly known as Twitter, help stop the spread of disinformation in the wake of the war between Israel and Hamas. Now, in a letter to Meta's Mark Zuckerberg, Thierry imposed a 24-hour deadline to submit a plan detailing how the platform will respond and take down disinformation on the platform.
In his post, Shellenberger said, quote, "Hi, sorry, but who exactly do you think you are to demand censorship of speech? In America, we don't even let our own politicians censor speech, much less foreign ones." Here to discuss how governments are trying to use the Israel-Hamas war to expand censorship is Michael Shellenberger himself. Welcome back, Michael.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I'm so glad you're on the case here. Unpack for us what the implications are of this letter.
Well, it could be very serious. I mean, this is it's a very dynamic moment, I should say, and things keep changing. You know, the CEO of X, formerly Twitter, sent a response to to Thierry Breton, the chief censor of the European Union, early this morning at 12:40 a.m., saying that they were dealing with this. They had been taking down some accounts. She also pointed to the fact that they have community notes, which is this crowdsourced fact-checking that X has been employing, which I think has been very impressive. I was very skeptical of that at first, but you know, I noted in what I wrote. I mean, before I had seen the Breton letter to X, I had seen the video game videos, which is by this point very realistic for people that don't play video games. It's very amazing to see people shooting bazookas at taking down helicopters. I had seen it and already been flagged by community notes as video game video. So it was already corrected. So it's not misinformation anymore when it's being corrected and saying this is from a video game. He mentions in his letter, what are you doing about this video game footage? Well, if he actually had been online, and I found myself a little, you know, it's like you get a little annoyed. I don't think he is actually somebody that goes online very much. He's a European bureaucrat. I suspect he was not himself doing the investigation here. But if you would go online, you see it's an extremely dynamic moment. We're in the midst of a fog of war type situation. There's, as everybody knows, there's been this huge question around whether or not there were babies beheaded. President Biden yesterday said that he had seen photos. That turned out later that was not the case. He had not seen photos. Just an hour ago, we saw a CNN report saying the Israeli government said they did not know if there had been babies beheaded. This is the kind of thing where we don't want bureaucrats in Europe to decide what information we're allowed to receive and when to get it. There's an open exploration. There's information coming in that we do not need a little central committee of censors deciding for us what information we should be able to get. Look, it's a completely politicized process. It's a completely subjective process. So this idea that this is going to be somehow better worked out by a little committee in Paris or in Brussels, rather than thousands of content creators and investigative reporters and people arguing on both sides, is absurd. So for me, the entire situation points to the incredible gift that is the First Amendment, that is free speech. So yeah, back off, Europe. Allow us to have our free speech. It's, you know, 250 years of this amazing experiment we've done in the United States. If anything, we think France and Europe should follow our example. We don't want to follow theirs.
Yes, and I think it's also worth pointing out that it's certainly the case. It's always been the case in a dynamic situation, to use your phrasing, in the wake of a terrorist attack or a violent episode or a bombing or a shooting. We see video footage, we see photos, we see claims, and some of them are true and some of them are false. That's not new. That's always been the case. It's also true that there are errors in the mainstream media, professional journalists make, reporters make in the course of the work they're doing. That's been the case with some of the claim that Biden made that it can't actually be sourced. You know, various reporters have made claims either way in either direction. So I find it seems hypocritical to me because the focus is always on the social media company from EU regulator type people. They're saying, oh, there's these possibly false or untrue or unsourced claims floating on social media. But like the traditional media also gets things wrong, but the attention is solely on how the platforms can do more. When, as you totally rightly pointing out, and Community Notes is I think it's been a fantastic success so far. Like you, I was initially skeptical, but it seems to letting people all weigh in and kind of have a democratic, almost Wikipedia-style process at arriving at truth has worked, not perfectly, but is working a lot better than basically any other fact-checking system the social media sites have come up with yet. Certainly better than doing it via European Union committee. But it's just so selective that they come after social media companies when you can find errors in the traditional media.
Well, yeah, and also you see heads of state spreading mis and disinformation, including, remember, the French government, when they had their riots, they put out something saying, oh, it was misinformation that they were considering shutting off social media sites entirely. Turned out later, they were considering it. So that was actually deliberate misinformation or disinformation. I'm following, as many people are, we're following a bunch of new, interesting voices from Israel. I'd been following somebody who I thought was a very good, someone that had a lot of good sources inside, appeared the Israeli military. And then when it came to this person, I won't say who it is, but when it came to the babies, they said anybody who denies that occurred is like a Holocaust denier. And they said, we know we have proof because Biden just said it. And I remember at the time being like, that doesn't, like, just because the president said it doesn't mean it's true. I'm experiencing this on a separate issue I work on around the wind industry and the whales, where people say, no, you're wrong, because the government said like 6 months ago or a year ago that it wasn't because of the wind industry. Our data is more recent. So it's like, allow the debate to occur. It's funny because one of the greatest French philosophers, I mean, if you look at French thinkers, they are absolutely obsessed with the fact that truth is much more subtle and changing over time. One of the greatest French philosophers of the last 100 years, Jacques Derrida, came to fame by saying you never can fully establish what the truth is or the meaning of something is because things keep changing. And so the meaning, for example, of Karl Marx, you don't know for another 100 years. So this idea that somehow like the truth is like an object in the world where it's very simple. It's a juvenile, childlike view of the truth. And I think that, to your point, it's this problem, this idea that there's somehow official sources or mainstream sources that somehow they're the repositories of truth. It's just a juvenile view. We know that the truth and a language and meaning simply doesn't work that way, and that more views, more perspectives, more speech is a better way to find out what the truth is than having some small group of people decide.
Yeah, I really want to get into specifically how these anti-speech interests seem to be aligning with some of the pro-Zionist forces who are really encouraging a certain kind of response to Gaza right now. This is a very sort of one-sided in this context direction of the speech suppression that's happening. We have a British Home Secretary Suella Braverman telling the senior police in the UK that waving a Palestinian flag or singing a chant advocating freedom for Palestinians in the region may be a criminal offense. And then subsequently, after she said that, there was video footage that was posted of policemen in St. Peter's Square in Manchester arresting pro-Palestinian protesters. You had footage of Israeli protesters who were protesting the bombing of the 2 million civilian population in Gaza, 50% children being arrested by police in Israel. And you have seen a kind of not direct speech suppression, but a number of people, from a sports writer that covers Philly sports teams to a Harvard student losing their job, their prospective job for after graduation, and even a truck with the names of the individuals who were members of the clubs that issued a number of letters in support of Palestine, driving around Harvard's campus with the effort of, I guess, publicly shaming them. Are you surprised at all by the kind of overwhelming interest in quelling and suppressing opinions, even opinions that you might disagree with, and at the these kind of institutions and the backing that these efforts to suppress that speech have gotten from some members of the conservative community that historically have been very skeptical and critical of similar efforts to suppress speech on the right.
Yeah, absolutely. Surprised and disappointed. I mean, I think that, it's been a very emotional 3 days. You may have seen there's this amazing Jon Stewart clip that's been going viral. I think Elon retweeted it from 9 years ago, where he was starting to offer a criticism of Israel and he was just being shouted down. That was sort of the whole gag. And so, I think emotions were very hot over the last 72 hours or more. I do think it's calming down a bit. But yeah, I think it's fair to say we've all seen people that have been some of our most magnificent critics of cancel culture and of censorship engaging in kind of behaviors and advocacy for those similar types of cancellations or kinds of censorship. You mentioned the case of Britain. I mean, the case in Harvard is really gross to go around and to do that kind of thing. Look, we should argue. We should tell people that they're wrong. We should disagree passionately. Allow those debates to occur. I mean, it's a very dark moment right now. I hate to be such a Pollyanna in some ways, but I do hope that it is a moment where people can start to see the real dark side. And the fact that, look, I mean, it's just all this ancient wisdom we have. I mean, if you go through the various wisdom traditions, you sort of see in the Bible stories of, hey, you can recognize the blindness in somebody else, the log in your eye, and you can't see the speck in your own. This idea from Nietzsche, which is when you do battle with monsters, take care you don't become a monster. I think that people you can see the emotion has led people to engage in ways that I think are not the best of them. And, it's funny because right before the attacks, we wrote a piece about how I was going around Ireland interviewing people about a hate speech law that would have involved pretty significant censorship, including sending the police into people's homes. And I came out of it being like, when you actually slow people down, this is the kind of classic Daniel Kahneman idea that there's sort of fast thinking and slow thinking. Fast thinking, very knee jerk, it's very emotional. But when you actually slow people down, just doing that has an effect on people. They become calmer. They think through the implications. They think through about how these proposals for censorship might be abused, the downsides of censorship culture, that we're all wrong. The line between good and evil runs through all men. I think it's a moment that calls out for some great humility and for tolerance and for just some of these really simple values that we tend to forget in the heat of the moment. So I absolutely think you're right to point to it. And I would just say, and we should be forgiving too. Some of those behaviors that we saw over the last 72 hours, I hope they don't continue as we go forward, because this is a moment that really is crying out for a new peace movement. I mean, we've got a piece coming out today about how the left used to be really where you would look for the peace movement, even when sometimes it was cringe or wrong or whatever, or sometimes too simplistic. It's sad to see so many folks, both on the right and the left, I think, not behaving as their highest selves right now.
Drawing on lessons from the Bible and from French philosophy. What are you not an expert in, Mr. Shellenberger? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.